So you guys seem to like it when I talk about Kung Fu Panda, huh? I've made videos focusing on the villains of the first two movies, with Tai Lung and Lord Shen, and they're both two of my best performing videos. So I figured I should complete the trilogy and talk about the villain in the third movie, and I'll probably make a video for the fourth movie as well when it comes out, which I'm very excited for. Kung Fu Panda 3 is different from Kung Fu Panda 1 and 2, because this one is pretty much universally agreed upon as the weakest of the trilogy. And while I don't think it's an outright bad movie, I tend to agree. It feels too light after the darker tones that I loved in Kung Fu Panda 2, which is surprising considering that both 2 and 3 have the same director, Jennifer Yu Nelson. Maybe it's because of the backlash 2 received for being too dark, so they felt the need to lighten things up. I'm not totally sure. As for the topic of this video, Kung Fu Panda 3's villain Kai is also, in my mind, the weakest of the three. In a way, the problems I have with Kai reflect the problems I have with the movie as a whole. It doesn't balance the tone as well as the other two. The potential is definitely there, but it just doesn't work as well for me. So let's not waste any more time and discuss why. First, let's start with the good. Kai's presentation is really cool. He's voiced by J.K. Simmons, who is awesome, and he has a great theme. His fighting style is different to what we've seen before. While Tai Lung just fought with his bare hands, and Shen relied on weapons like knives, swords, and string, Kai uses jade swords attached together with a chain. It's cool because we see all the different ways he uses them, in combat or scaling cliffs. It makes him different from the other villains in terms of their fight scenes, which is important. Tai Lung's fights rely more on hand-to-hand combat, while Shen tries to avoid fighting at all cost, using weapons and deception as he's no match in real hand-to-hand kung fu. I've discussed both of these fighting styles in my videos on Tai Lung and Lord Shen, but Kai seems to be a nice mix between the two. We get more of the combat and action we saw in Kung Fu Panda 1, but the way Kai uses the jade swords makes the fight seem different and cool. His fight with Shifu in the Furious 5 at the Jade Palace is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Speaking of which, we have to talk about another aspect of Kai's presentation, and that's his intimidation. Having a villain whose concept is taking the power from other kung fu masters in the form of their chi is really cool. In concept. In execution, it's not as cool, which we'll get into later, but in terms of building up the main villain Kai, it works. With the Jade Zombies, we see every kung fu master Kai has defeated, and it helps build him up as a credible force. In my Shen video, I talked about how the color red is used, but in Kung Fu Panda 3, it's the color green, which is my favorite color. Kai's eyes are green, his jade swords, his zombies, there's a green haze when he knocks over the Jade Palace. The color green is usually linked with nature, growth, and rebirth, which in a way makes sense for Kai, considering everyone he defeats is rebirthed into a jade zombie, causing Kai's power to grow. Green also represents envy, which is what Kai felt towards Oogway and his chi, which caused him to go mad with power. Like I said in my Shen video, you could argue that this is just to look cool, and it does look very cool, but the Kung Fu Panda trilogy holds a lot of symbolism, so I wouldn't put this past them. But as far as presentation goes, in terms of Kai's fight scenes, his intimidation, and the color green, I would say Kai makes the case for a strong villain. But let's get beyond just the presentation. Kung Fu Panda 3 opens with Oogway in the spirit realm. He practices inner peace, which is a nice callback to the second movie, before we see the jade swords and Oogway is attacked by Kai. This movie gets right into the action. The spirit realm is such an awesome setting because the animation is just so much more creative and fun. We see the color contrast, Oogway fighting with yellow while Kai fights with green, and the spirit realm just makes the action way more outlandish and crazy in a good way. There's giant floating rocks that Kai slices through, Oogway hits him with a yin-yang symbol. You can tell the animators are just flexing their muscles as hard as they can here. Through their dialogue, we learn that these two fought 500 years ago, and now Kai wants a rematch. He's taken the power of others in the spirit realm, and at the end of this fight, he does the same with Oogway. In Kung Fu Panda 1, we saw just how powerful Oogway was when he stepped in to stop Tai Lung with ease. So seeing Kai beat him here makes you really buy into him as a credible threat. It's a good opening scene. The next time we see Kai is when he enters the mortal world and runs into these farmers. The joke here is that one of them poops eggs and they don't know who Kai is. Honestly, for this scene alone, I'm fine with it, but only if it happens in this one scene. Like, obviously these dudes aren't gonna know who he is, but the joke of no one knowing who Kai is happens multiple times, even with our main heroes, and it doesn't help with the tension of the story. Tai Lung was never the butt of a joke, except for maybe in the last fight with Po, but that was more for fun. Shen was the butt of the joke in one scene with the soothsayer, but that's because the soothsayer has legitimate power over him, with his fortune hanging over his head. With Kai, it's the same running joke done multiple times. You can have people not know who he is, but you don't have to pause the tension to make it into a joke every time. And I love running gags in movies, I think they're great, but not when they make your villain look pathetic. This is more of a problem with the movie as a whole that bleeds its way into the villain. Later, when we learn about Kai and Oogway's backstory, we learn of their friendship before Oogway was hurt and healed by the panda's chi. The power of the chi corrupted Kai, and he and Oogway fought, with Oogway winning. The backstory is pretty simple. Maybe not as compelling as Shen or Tai Lung, but it still works. And that is a running theme for Kai as a villain. So we've covered how Kai is introduced and established. His plan, once he defeats Oogway and makes it back into the mortal world, is to take the chi from everybody. It works well as a motive, but in its execution I think it could be better. The use of jade zombies just doesn't really work for me. I think for someone like Lord Shen, having an army made sense because he wasn't the best at Kung Fu. But for Kai beat Master Oogway, he shouldn't need an army. The army isn't bad and it's good to give the heroes other people to beat up. But let's look at the scene where Crane and Mantis track down Kai. They run into some other Kung Fu masters like Master Croc from the last movie. They say they all tracked the Jade Zombies to an abandoned ship where Kai is just waiting for them. He's just waiting there and it makes the heroes look kinda dumb by just going right to him. We get a cool little fight with Kai and Crane and the scene works. It's not a bad scene, but I feel like Kai should be more urgent. In the spirit realm, it was implied that he'd been hunting down every Kung Fu master, so why can't he do the same in the mortal world? When he does come after our heroes like his fight at the Jade Palace with the Furious Five, it's one of the best scenes in the movie. We see Kai in action in full force. The heroes work together to put up a fight, but Kai overpowers them. He beats half of the Furious Five and Shifu by himself. At the end of the fight, we get one of the best Kai moments, where he takes the statue of Oogway and lassos it with his jade swords, using it like a wrecking ball to take down the Jade Palace. When he does this, we get a hint of Oogway Ascends, the song that played when Oogway died in the score. The Jade Palace is something that's been there in all three movies as the home of Oogway, Shifu, the Five, and Po, and seeing it destroyed is something a final boss like Kai should do. This scene is how you present Kai. The badass entrance with his theme and the twirling of the jade swords hitting against the ground, the action where Kai shows how powerful he can be, and the emotion seeing the Jade Palace, Uguay's home, destroyed. There are some problems with this scene, like the rest of the 5 other than Tigress being captured a bit too easily, which holds it back from being on par with the bridge fight in Kung Fu Panda 1, but it is still one of my favorite scenes in this movie. When Kai is on the hunt, whether it's for Po, Oogway, or the Furious 5, it's great. He is an intimidating force and should be presented as such. He can still use the Jade Zombie army, but I don't know if he should be someone who waits around. If you want to keep the army, you can, but Kai should use them like he does in the fight with the 5, or the climactic fight with the Pandas. If he's gonna have an army, he should lead them, not have them do his dirty work. Just have Kai be a badass all the time. Don't have him wait around. Don't have him get joked at. Which brings me to my next point. The jokes in this movie aren't all bad. There's just way too many. It's a Kung Fu Panda movie, so there's bound to be jokes, and some of them are actually funny. But one of my favorite aspects of Kung Fu Panda 1 and 2 are how it's able to balance the jokes with the action and darker tones of the movie. But this one overdoes it. There are funny jokes, like when Shifu thinks the scroll is blank again, that was a genuinely funny callback to the first movie. Or when Po sees everyone as jade zombies, and says you're all green, except you, Mantis, you look the same. That's another funny callback. But the Panda Village does give off Ewok vibes in Return of the Jedi, and it doesn't really help with the tone of the movie. I will say though, Po having 2 dads is funny. I already brought up the joke of no one knowing who Kai is. It makes him look pathetic, which isn't great. When Kai is intimidating, he's great, but it's hard to take him seriously in these intimidating moments if you remember all the jokes. Like when Kai has Po beat, and Po tells everyone to run, that's a good moment. But these big moments can't hit you as hard because he's been made the butt of the joke one too many times. When Tai Lung is made fun of in his fight with Po, it works because he takes everything so seriously and hasn't been joked with up until that point. But when Kai is made fun of by random farmers, Po, Shifu, it's just too much. So when Po jokes with him in their final battle in the Spirit Realm, which looks awesome by the way, it just doesn't hit the same, and it feels like they're just piling on more and more jokes, and it does not help. I don't think Kai is a bad villain. I don't think Kung Fu Panda 3 is a bad movie either, but to me it's just not as strong overall. It feels too light in its tone, especially when you want your villain to be the most intimidating one yet. And when you think about how cohesive this trilogy is, it makes me feel bad. We all know the link between the 3 villains, with Tai Lung representing the body, Lord Shen representing the mind, and Kai representing the soul, with Po conquering them all, and it's disappointing that the soul is the weakest one. There are moments where it feels very derivative of Kung Fu Panda 2, with the Jade Zombie fight and the wolf fight being pretty similar, and Po's arc as a whole. In the second movie, he finds out who he is, overcoming his tragic past with Shen and finding inner peace, and in this one he doesn't know who he is again. And compare the backstories of the 3 villains. Tai Lung was connected to Shifu and told his whole life he'd be great, only to be denied the dragon scroll he'd worked for and was promised. Lord Shen was connected to Po and led the genocide of the pandas, causing the death of his mother. And Kai is connected to Oogway and just got power hungry. It doesn't hold the same weight as Tai Lung and Shen's backstories, therefore making Kai hold less of a weight as a villain. But when we see Kai at his peak, A villain who is unrelenting in his chase for power, a villain who is taking on Shifu and the Furious Five, destroying their home, making Po run scared. It works. Maybe with a little more work and tweaking put into Kai and a little less Panda Ewok Village, this movie would be looked at much more fondly. Give something more than being hungry for power. Give something more than sending Jade zombies to do dirty work. The presentation is there, with his epic green color scheme, the fights, his awesome theme, and J.K. Simmons' voice acting, but it just doesn't connect or hit as hard as the trilogy's previous villains. The potential is there for a great villain, but the pieces don't fully fit together. Kai is by no means a bad villain. He's just misunderstood.